Hey yogis, welcome to my channel. My name is Kassandra and today I'm doing a tutorial on how to step from three-legged dog to a lunge. So how to step the foot through from downward facing dog. This is something that you guys have been asking me about, but more importantly, this is something that I see my students struggle with very often. It's a really, really difficult transition, and often teachers cue it as if it was the easiest and simplest thing in the world. And I'm certainly guilty of that as well, but I don't want to give the impression that it's like everyone's supposed to just naturally be able to do that. It is challenging. You do need quite a bit of lower belly strength as well as hip flexor strength, which is the most important. So I'm going to show you how to do it, but then more importantly, I'm just going to take you through some exercises and other poses that you can do at home, which will help you increase your strength, and eventually you should be able to make that transition work. So for a few of those exercises, we're going to do them with blocks. Blocks are going to make that so much easier for you guys. So definitely grab some blocks if you have them at home. And before I actually go through all of that, I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about if you're not really sure what that step through is. So more often than not, this step through happens when we're doing any kind of like standing flows and vinyasas. So from downward facing dog, for example, I would tell you to reach the right leg up to the sky, and then I'd exhale and step the front foot forward to the top of the mat. So the right knee comes into the chest and the right foot steps forward. So what tends to happen in a lot of people where that transition doesn't really happen, the leg will go up, and then somewhere here, the leg just cannot, there's like something that seems to be blocking the knee and the leg from making their way forward. So very often what students will do, which is totally fine, they'll grab a hold of their ankle just to kind of step it forward. So if that's where you're at in your practice, it's totally fine. This is not like a big deal. It's certainly not a problem. You do what you need to do to get that foot forward. But if you would like to be able to just kind of do it without grabbing the ankle, this is what we're going to go over today. So first, I want to show you what's actually happening when I'm doing this transition, because I don't think a lot of people notice this. So as I'm lifting my right leg up, I'm starting to pull, I'm lifting my hips up as high as they'll go as I draw my thigh into my belly. I'm trying to keep my belly in contact with my thigh as much as possible. If the knee is down low here, I'm not going to be able to get my foot forward. It's just not going to happen. So that means you do need a ton of core strength. What's also happening is that the further forward I'm going, the more I'm kind of shifting my weight onto my left hand. And if I were to like slow down the video, you'd see that I'm actually coming up onto my right fingertips in order to create more space so that I can step that foot forward. It's hard to do. Like, it's possible for me to do it with the hands flat, but more often than not, I come up onto the right fingertips. So one thing, whenever I've like brought this up in my public yoga classes here in Ottawa, students tell me like, oh, I don't think I can do it because my arms are too short or my legs are too long. And I mean, odds are your arms are not too short, your legs are not too long. Most people are fairly proportionate in that way. So I wouldn't say that that's the problem, but I know that that is definitely how it feels. So one thing that we can do to make it easier and to start to get the motion ingrained in us and build up the strength is to kind of fake lengthen our arms with the use of blocks. So one thing I would recommend is the next time you're working on this, start your downward dog with your hands on blocks. So you still want your palms to be shoulder width distance apart, feet are hip width distance apart, and you might need to actually widen it a little more just so you have room here. But it's the same thing. All you're doing, this will give you a little bit more length so that when you reach your right leg up, come forward through the plank pose. Again, you're trying to close the gap between your thigh and the belly. Don't let the knee come down. But as you come forward, you have a lot more room now to be able to step that foot forward. And you can even play around with this with the blocks higher up. Now, it's not going to really be as comfortable of a downward dog, but you should be able to just practice this motion of rocking your weight forward, pulling the belly, keeping it close to the chest, and then stepping it through, and same thing as you step it back. So blocks are a really great way to start working on this motion. So in terms of biomechanics and what's actually happening in your body in order to be able to step that foot forward, what's happening is that you're contracting through the abdominals and you're mostly contracting through the hip flexor. So if you're having a hard time with this, I would say that more than anything, this is the kind of strength you need to work on building. And the great thing is we work on this strength a lot in yoga. So over time, it should get easier. One of the ways that we work on this all the time is when we do, I do this all the time in my classes, three-legged dog, knee to nose, when we're working on core strength. So for example, in three-legged dog, right leg comes up, you inhale to lift up, and on the exhale, you come forward to plank pose, so my shoulders go over my wrist, and you try to touch your knee to your nose. Inhale up, and exhale, same thing coming back. So one thing that people tend to do sometimes is, again, they let their knee come too low. You're instead always trying to touch your thigh to your belly. So if you do this, I don't know, if you do like 10 a day on each side, you are going to build up a lot of strength in the long run. But if for any reason this is like a little bit too advanced or too difficult, there's an even easier way that you can work on this strength, and it's just as effective. And we also do it fairly often in yoga, and it's the same motion, but from tabletop pose. So instead of being in down dog, you can just come to tabletop pose on hands and knees, drawing the navel in. And as you extend your right leg out and back behind you, think of rolling your right hip down, so the front of your knee, front of your toes, pointing down to the mat, and then exhale, you're tapping your knee to your nose. It's the exact same action. Instead of doing it from down dog, I'm just doing it from a tabletop pose. But I'm working on the same thing. I'm working on squeezing and strengthening the hip flexors to pull the knee and get it to touch thigh to chest, keeping that in contact. So if you want, I would recommend starting from here and then eventually seeing if from tabletop pose, you're able to step that foot through. And again, notice how I come up onto my fingertips just because I need to get my arm out of the way. So working on this one, you can even make it harder by reaching the opposite arm out, contracting. Pretty much any of my core strength yoga classes on YouTube are going to help you work on this. So I want to show you one other thing that you can do to help build strength in hip flexors and lower belly, and it's done from standing position. So I think I've also done this in a few of my videos, but if you were just to stand at the top of the mat, you can have with your hands on your hips, leaning on one leg and just pulling the right knee up. This action of picking up the knee, this is what our hip flexors do. They flex at the hips. So they allow you to pull that knee up. And just letting your knee hover there for a few seconds, you're going to feel the hip flexors start to tire out because we don't necessarily always work on it all that much. So when you're working on this, try not to, I'll turn to face forward. So often what happens is when we lift one leg, we kind of dump all of our weight into the opposite hip. So you still want to push that left hip up. You don't want to tilt on one side more than the other. I'm just squeezing and lifting up. And then I'll just switch sides because I've been doing the right leg a lot. One way that you can make it even harder for yourself when you're really working on strength, you want to try to focus on pulling your navel in and then maybe even extending your leg up. And if I was really working on strength here, what I would do is to do little drills of just tapping. So you can tap the toes down and lift them up. So if anyone has ever done ballet, like this is what you're doing, right? So thankfully, I danced for a long time. So this strength was something that I had been working on for pretty much all of my life. But if this isn't an action that you're used to doing, hip flexors might be tight without necessarily being strong. So doing things like three-legged dog to lunge can be challenging. But it's the same kind of action. This action of drawing in is the same thing I'm trying to do when I'm in three-legged dog. I'm trying to pull in. So pulling in like this, you can practice it from here, and then eventually shifting forward into plank pose, always trying to touch the thigh to the belly, and then maybe reaching it through. One other tip that I would suggest is that when you're trying to step the foot forward, something that I see people do all the time is they keep their head down so much, they're almost looking back. When you want to step something forward, you need to look way past your mat. So if I'm going from three-legged dog here, I'm not looking in between my thumbs. I'm looking forward past my palms. And I don't really know why, but it does help. It does help that foot to step forward. We do the same trick when we're in downward dog, trying to step or hop to the top of the mat. Most teachers will cue you not to look at the top of the mat, but to look past your mat. For some reason, it helps give you like a little bit more lift, a little bit more bounce, and it seems to make things a lot easier. So I hope you guys have found this helpful. Definitely play around with it. Start from tabletop pose. Use your blocks next time you're in down dog, three-legged dog, and trying to step the foot forward. Try coming up onto the fingertips as well, just so you give yourself more space, and work really with like standing leg raises to really build up hip flexor strength. That's mainly what you're looking for. Other hip flexor strengthener poses like boat pose can be really helpful. But I would really focus on the floor work instead. So tabletop, down dog, and then maybe the standing leg raises with your blocks. Hope this is helpful. If you have any other tutorials or transition breakdowns you'd like me to go over, please leave me a comment down below and I would love to put something together for you and teach it here on YouTube. If you don't already, please do subscribe to my channel. I put out new classes every single week. Thank you all so much, yogis. Namaste.